I never thought a simple Saturday morning at my favorite coffee shop would change everything. There I was, sitting by the window with my latte, watching Seattle's autumn leaves dance in the breeze, feeling genuinely content for the first time in 2 years. My new haircut framed my face perfectly. My cozy studio apartment was finally decorated exactly how I wanted, and for once, confidence radiated from within me. After 18 months of healing from my breakup with Marcus, I had built something beautiful from the ashes of that toxic relationship. But peace has a funny way of attracting chaos, and what happened next reminded me why some people can never let go of what they lost. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Hit that like button if you have ever had to deal with an ex who could not let go, and do not forget to subscribe, because this story is about to get very interesting. Trust me, you will want to hear how this all played out. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to think Marcus would simply disappear from my life. Our 3-year relationship, which lasted from when I was 24 until 27, had been a masterclass in manipulation disguised as love. Marcus was everything you would expect from a successful marketing executive in downtown Seattle. Charming, articulate, and devastatingly handsome. When we first met at a networking event, he swept me off my feet with grand gestures and romantic proclamations. But slowly, like fog rolling in from the Puget Sound, his controlling nature began to suffocate everything I loved about myself. He criticized my friends, calling them immature and saying they were holding me back from my potential. He questioned my job choices, suggesting I was not ambitious enough for someone of his caliber. Even my appearance became fair game for his commentary. The woman who once wore bright colors and bold jewelry gradually faded into neutral tones and conservative styles that met his approval. The breakup 18 months ago was nothing short of explosive. I had finally gathered the courage to end things after a particularly humiliating incident where he belittled me in front of his colleagues at a company party. When I told him we were done, Marcus refused to accept it. He cycled through every manipulation tactic in the book, promises to change, threats of self-harm, and desperate pleas about our shared history. For 6 months, I endured a relentless campaign of harassment that forced me to block his number, delete him from all social media platforms, and even change my gym membership to avoid his stalking. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the harassment stopped. Marcus seemed to vanish from my world, leaving me free to rebuild my life from the ground up. Those months of healing were some of the most transformative of my existence. Therapy helped me understand how deeply his psychological abuse had affected my sense of self. I discovered boundaries were not walls to keep people out, but gates to let the right people in. My current life was a testament to that healing journey. I had moved into a cozy studio apartment in Capitol Hill, complete with exposed brick walls and large windows that filled the space with natural light. Maple, my rescue dog, a golden retriever mix with one floppy ear, had become my constant companion and the reason I started each day with gratitude. Through her, I discovered the dog park community and eventually met other animal lovers who shared my values. Professional growth followed emotional growth. My new position as program coordinator at an environmental nonprofit felt like a calling rather than just a job. I traveled to conservation sites, coordinated community outreach programs, and worked with people who genuinely wanted to make the world better. The salary was lower than my previous corporate position, but the fulfillment was immeasurable. My colleagues respected my input, and for the first time in years, I felt intellectually stimulated and appreciated. My social circle had completely transformed as well. Through a hiking group I joined 6 months after the breakup, I met Sarah, who quickly became my closest friend. Sarah was everything Marcus had convinced me I did not deserve: supportive, honest, and genuinely happy for my successes. Our weekend adventures exploring Washington's mountain trails became sacred time for processing life and celebrating small victories. Then there was David. Sweet, gentle David, whom I met at the dog park when his rescue pitty Bruno became fast friends with Maple. David was a veterinarian with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of caring for animals. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared laughter, rather than the intense passion and drama that had characterized my time with Marcus. David never questioned my need for space or my careful approach to intimacy. He understood that trust was something I was rebuilding, and he was content to earn it gradually. But the first signs that my peaceful existence was under threat began subtly, like hairline cracks in a seemingly solid foundation. I noticed someone had viewed my LinkedIn profile repeatedly, always from an anonymous account. At first, I assumed it was a potential employer or networking contact, but the frequency seemed excessive. Then came the strange Instagram activity likes on photos from months ago, the kind of deep diving that suggested someone was studying my life rather than casually browsing. Sarah mentioned seeing someone who looked like Marcus at Pike Place Market, our old weekend hangout spot, but I dismissed it as coincidence. Seattle was not that large, and I could not live my life in fear of random sightings. My new confidence told me that even if it was Marcus, I was strong enough to handle it. I was no longer the woman who had trembled at his disapproval. The first direct contact shattered my sense of security like a rock through glass. The email arrived at my work address on a Tuesday morning, nestled between project updates and meeting invitations. The subject line read simply, "Hope you are well." My stomach dropped as I recognized the sender, Marcus, writing from what appeared to be a new email address. The message itself was carefully crafted to seem casual and friendly, the kind of correspondence you might receive from an old college acquaintance. He mentioned hearing through mutual friends that I was doing well, expressed happiness for my success, and suggested we grab coffee to catch up like mature adults. The tone was so reasonable, so normal, that for a moment I questioned whether I was overreacting. But I had learned to trust my instincts, and every instinct screamed danger. How had he obtained my work email address? We had no mutual friends who would have shared that information. The very fact that he had researched my professional life after 18 months of silence felt like a violation of the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. I screenshot the email and saved it in a folder I hoped I would never need to use. My decision was immediate: no response. Engaging with Marcus, even to tell him to leave me alone, would only confirm that his tactics were working. The old version of me might have felt compelled to explain myself or attempt to reason with him. The new version understood that silence was sometimes the strongest statement you could make. What I did not realize was that my silence would only fuel Marcus's determination to insert himself back into my life. Over the following weeks, I discovered he had launched what could only be described as a comprehensive surveillance campaign using social media as his primary weapon of intrusion. Marcus had always been technologically savvy, a skill that served him well in his marketing career, but now made him a formidable stalker. He created multiple fake social media accounts, each with carefully curated profiles that appeared legitimate enough to avoid detection by platform algorithms. Through these personas, he monitored every aspect of my online presence, studying my posts like a researcher analyzing data for patterns and weaknesses. He discovered my hiking photos from weekend adventures with Sarah and our growing group of outdoor enthusiasts. He found pictures from volunteer events at the animal shelter, images that captured me genuinely smiling while surrounded by rescued dogs and cats. Most concerning were his discoveries about David. Through tagged photos and comments, Marcus learned about our relationship, our routine appearances at community events, and our weekly visits to the farmer's market. The psychological profile that emerged from his digital investigation painted a picture that must have been devastating to his ego. I was not just surviving without him, I was thriving. The woman he had systematically broken down had rebuilt herself into someone stronger, happier, and more fulfilled than she had ever been during their relationship. This reality, I would later understand, was something his narcissistic personality could never accept. Marcus began appearing in my physical world with increasing frequency. At first, the sightings seemed coincidental enough to dismiss. He would be across the street when I left my favorite coffee shop, maintaining enough distance to avoid direct confrontation, but close enough to ensure I noticed him. During my regular hiking trails with Sarah, we would spot him on adjacent paths, always with his phone out as if he was taking scenic photos, but somehow managing to capture us in his shots. The grocery store incidents were more unsettling. Marcus would appear in my peripheral vision as I shopped for produce, lingering at the end of aisles, just long enough for our eyes to meet before disappearing around corners. The message was clear. He knew my routines, my preferences, my schedule. Privacy had become an illusion. Sarah was the first to voice what I was trying not to acknowledge. During one of our Thursday evening pottery classes, she quietly mentioned noticing the same man at multiple locations where we had spent time together. Her description matched Marcus perfectly: tall, well-dressed, with prematurely gray hair, and an intensity in his gaze that made her uncomfortable. But Marcus's most insidious tactic was his manipulation of our old mutual friends. These were people I had distanced myself from during the healing process, not because I disliked them, but because they reminded me of a version of myself I was trying to forget. Marcus understood that these individuals represented potential weak points in my newly constructed defenses. He reached out to friends like Jamie, who had been part of our original social circle, with carefully crafted stories about his personal growth and transformation. Marcus claimed he had undergone therapy, recognized his past mistakes, and simply wanted closure to move forward in his life. He presented himself as a man who had learned from his errors and deserved the chance to make amends. Jamie, who had always been a generous and trusting person, fell for the performance completely. During a chance encounter at a bookstore, she enthusiastically shared details about my new life, my job at the nonprofit, my move to Capitol Hill, and even information about David. She had no idea she was providing intelligence to someone who intended to use that information as ammunition. Another friend, Michael, became an unwitting accomplice when Marcus expressed concern about my well-being during their chance meeting at a downtown bar. Marcus painted a picture of me as someone who had been struggling with mental health issues during our relationship, suggesting that my apparent happiness might be a facade hiding deeper problems. These subtle character assassinations were designed to plant seeds of doubt about my stability and authenticity. The direct confrontation I had been dreading finally occurred on a Thursday afternoon as I left my office building for lunch. Marcus appeared as if from nowhere, stepping out from behind a parked car with that familiar smile that once made my heart race, but now made my blood run cold. He claimed he happened to be in the neighborhood for a business meeting and thought he would say hello. The lie was so transparent, it was almost insulting. My office was located in a residential area of Capitol Hill, miles from the downtown financial district where Marcus worked. There was no legitimate business reason for him to be anywhere near my workplace. I handled the encounter with a professionalism that surprised even me. Speaking in clear, measured tones, I told Marcus that his presence was unwelcome and asked him to leave the premises immediately. I avoided emotional language or personal attacks instead, treating him like any other unwanted solicitor who needed to be firmly but politely dismissed. Marcus persisted, claiming we needed to talk, that too much had been left unresolved between us. He spoke about missing our connection, about the unique understanding we had shared about the way we could finish each other's sentences. His words were designed to trigger nostalgia and doubt, to make me question whether I was being unreasonably harsh to someone who simply wanted to communicate. When verbal persuasion failed, Marcus tried physical intimidation. He stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that made several passersby turn and look. His voice dropped to the intimate tone he had once used during our most vulnerable moments together, creating an inappropriate atmosphere of forced intimacy in a public setting. That was when I realized I needed backup. I walked back into my office building and approached the security desk, explaining that someone was harassing me in the parking area and I needed an escort to my car. The security guard, a kindly older man named Robert, immediately accompanied me outside and professionally asked Marcus to leave the property. The flowers arrived the next morning, a lavish arrangement of white lilies and red roses delivered to my office reception desk. The attached note was a masterpiece of manipulation, apologizing for any misunderstanding and expressing hope that we could eventually find a way to be friends. The message was crafted to appear reasonable and conciliatory to anyone who might read it, but I recognized the underlying threat in its persistence. The final phase of escalation came when Marcus discovered David's veterinary clinic through his online stalking activities. What followed was a systematic attack on David's professional reputation that demonstrated the depths of Marcus's vindictive nature. He created multiple fake online accounts to leave negative reviews claiming poor animal care and unprofessional behavior. When David mentioned receiving strange complaint calls from supposed clients reporting concerns about his practice, I immediately understood the connection. Marcus was not content to simply disrupt my life. He was targeting anyone who contributed to my happiness. The realization that he would hurt innocent people to get to me filled me with a rage I had not felt since our relationship ended. For the first time since the harassment resumed, I seriously considered involving law enforcement. But Marcus had been careful to operate in gray areas that were difficult to prosecute. His appearances in public spaces could be explained as coincidence. His emails and gifts, while unwelcome, were not explicitly threatening. Even the fake reviews could be dismissed as disgruntled customers rather than a coordinated attack. The climax of Marcus's campaign to reclaim control over my life occurred at Sarah's 29th birthday party, held at a trendy downtown restaurant known for its rooftop terrace and craft cocktail menu. Sarah had planned an intimate celebration with close friends, people who represented the supportive community I had built during my healing journey. It was meant to be an evening of laughter, good food, and genuine connection. Marcus somehow learned about the event, most likely through his network of manipulated mutual friends who remained unaware of his true intentions. He arrived at the restaurant dressed in an expensive navy suit that I recognized from our time together, looking every inch the successful professional he had always prided himself on being. His timing was calculated for maximum impact. He waited until the party was in full swing before making his entrance. When I spotted him approaching our reserved section, my entire body went into fight or flight mode. My hands began shaking, and the familiar knot of anxiety that I had worked so hard to dissolve reformed in my stomach. But this time, instead of shrinking or fleeing. I felt something different: anger. Pure, righteous anger at his audacity to infiltrate a space where he had no business being. Marcus approached our group with the confidence of someone who belonged there, greeting Sarah with an enthusiastic hug and birthday wishes. To everyone else, he appeared to be simply another friend celebrating with us. He claimed he happened to be dining at the restaurant with colleagues and could not pass up the opportunity to wish Sarah well on her special day. The performance was flawless and chilling. Marcus worked the room like the skilled salesman he was engaging in conversations about topics he had gleaned from social media surveillance. He asked about hiking trails he had seen in photos, mentioned environmental causes he knew I cared about, and even brought up local events he had never attended, but knew we had. Most disturbing were his subtle attempts to rewrite the narrative of our relationship. When conversation naturally turned to how people knew each other, Marcus described our past with carefully chosen words that painted me as someone who had gone through a difficult period that required his support. He referenced my supposed struggles with anxiety and decision-making issues that had only existed because of his psychological manipulation. These character assassinations were delivered with such apparent concern and affection that they seemed like the caring observations of a worried ex-boyfriend, rather than deliberate attempts to undermine my credibility. Several people who did not know our history began looking at me with expressions of sympathy, as if I were a fragile person they needed to handle delicately. When David arrived to pick me up as planned, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. I watched Marcus size up my new partner with undisguised hostility, his charming facade cracking for the first time that evening. David, sensing the tension but unaware of its source, introduced himself politely and attempted to make conversation. Marcus responded with barely concealed aggression, making cutting remarks about David's profession and suggesting that people who worked with animals might lack the sophistication for more complex relationships. The insults were wrapped in humor and delivered with a smile, but everyone present could feel the hostility radiating from him. The confrontation exploded in the restaurant parking lot after David and I attempted to leave. Marcus followed us outside, abandoning any pretense of coincidental encounter. He demanded to speak with me privately, claiming that David was clearly not right for me and that anyone could see I was just using him to make Marcus jealous. David, who had remained calm throughout the evening, finally reached his limit when Marcus began making personal attacks about our relationship. The argument escalated quickly, with Marcus becoming verbally aggressive and David standing protectively between us. Other party guests spilled out of the restaurant, drawn by the raised voices and obvious conflict. But this public confrontation was just the beginning of a new phase in Marcus's harassment campaign. Over the following days, his stalking intensified to levels that made my previous experiences seem mild by comparison. He began following my daily routine with military precision, appearing at every location where I regularly spent time. My morning coffee run became a gauntlet of anxiety as I spotted him sitting in his car across the street from my usual cafe. My evening dog walks through the neighborhood required constant vigilance, as he would materialize on parallel streets, always visible, but maintaining enough distance to avoid direct confrontation. Weekend hiking trips with Sarah became exercises in paranoia as we repeatedly encountered him on adjacent trails. The psychological impact was devastating. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking and double-checking the locks on my apartment door, and losing sleep because every small noise made me wonder if he was outside my building. The confident, peaceful woman I had worked so hard to become was being systematically eroded by his relentless presence. Marcus began leaving items at my apartment door, carefully chosen artifacts from our relationship that served as psychological triggers. Old photographs of us together appeared in my mailbox, accompanied by handwritten notes about the happy memories we had shared. Small gifts that referenced inside jokes or significant moments from our past were left where I could not miss them. The items were arranged to appear innocent enough that building management could not treat them as threats, but their emotional impact was profound. Each discovery sent me spiraling back to memories I had worked hard to process and put behind me. The timing was clearly intentional. He knew my schedule well enough to ensure I would find these reminders when I was alone and most vulnerable to their psychological impact. His final and most devastating attack came through social media manipulation that threatened both my personal relationships and professional reputation. Marcus launched an elaborate campaign designed to create confusion and doubt about the nature of our current relationship status. Using the fake accounts he had created for surveillance, Marcus began posting old photographs of us together with captions that suggested we were reconnecting and working through our differences. He tagged me in posts I never consented to, creating a false narrative that we were rebuilding our relationship through mature communication and mutual understanding. The posts were crafted to appear authentic and hopeful, showing only our happiest moments together, without any hint of the dysfunction that had actually characterized our relationship. To anyone who did not know our history, it looked like a positive story of two people finding their way back to each other. The impact on my current relationships was immediate and devastating. New friends began questioning what was really happening, wondering why I had not mentioned that I was reconciling with an ex-boyfriend. David started expressing doubts about my honesty, pointing out the contradiction between my claims that Marcus was harassing me and the social media evidence that suggested we were voluntarily spending time together. My professional reputation suffered when colleagues began seeing these confusing posts and wondering about my personal life. The environmental nonprofit where I worked maintained strict policies about social media presence, and the apparent drama surrounding my relationship status began to affect how my supervisors viewed my professionalism and judgment. Marcus had successfully isolated me from the support network I had spent months building, turning my own success and happiness against me. The peaceful life I had constructed was crumbling under the weight of his systematic psychological warfare, and for the first time since our breakup, I felt truly defeated. The moment everything changed happened on a quiet Tuesday evening as I sat in my apartment surrounded by printed screenshots and handwritten notes documenting every incident of harassment over the past 2 months. Maple was curled up beside me on the couch, her warm presence providing the only comfort I could find as I stared at the overwhelming evidence of Marcus's campaign against my peace. I realized I had been reacting instead of responding, allowing him to dictate the terms of every encounter and manipulation. The woman I had become through therapy and self-reflection was stronger than this, more strategic than this. I had been treating Marcus like the man I once loved, instead of the predator he had revealed himself to be. My transformation began with a phone call to Lisa, an attorney friend from my hiking group who specialized in harassment cases. Over coffee the next morning, I laid out the complete timeline of incidents, showing her photographs, emails, social media screenshots, and witness statements from friends who had observed his behavior. Lisa listened with the focused attention of someone who had seen similar patterns many times before. She explained that while individual incidents might seem minor, the cumulative pattern clearly constituted harassment and stalking under Washington state law. More importantly, She helped me understand that Marcus's sophistication in avoiding obvious legal violations actually worked against him, creating a documented pattern that demonstrated premeditation and calculation. Together, we developed a comprehensive legal strategy that went beyond simply obtaining a restraining order. Lisa advised me to file a formal police report that would establish an official record of the harassment coordinate with building security to document his surveillance of my apartment and reach out to David's veterinary clinic to gather evidence of the fake review campaign. The process of building my case was empowering in ways I had not expected. Instead of feeling like a victim reacting to Marcus's attacks, I became an investigator, gathering evidence of his crimes. Each piece of documentation represented my refusal to accept his version of reality, my commitment to fighting back with facts rather than emotions. I coordinated with David and my friends to create a unified response strategy. Instead of allowing Marcus to manipulate us separately, we began sharing information and supporting each other as a team. David provided documentation of the fake reviews and complaint calls, while Sarah and others offered to serve as witnesses to his stalking behavior. The security measures I implemented were both practical and psychologically liberating. I installed a video doorbell that recorded every approach to my apartment, changed my daily routines to become unpredictable, and started varying my routes to work and leisure activities. Instead of living in fear of his surveillance, I began documenting his behavior as evidence for legal proceedings. The turning point came when I discovered that Marcus had made a crucial mistake in his social media manipulation campaign. In his eagerness to create a convincing false narrative about our reconciliation, he had posted photos that included metadata, proving they were uploaded from devices I had never used at times when we were not together. This technical evidence provided legal proof that he was creating fraudulent content without my consent. Armed with this evidence, Lisa helped me file for a comprehensive restraining order that included provisions for online harassment and third-party contact. The legal filing included a detailed timeline of incidents, photographic evidence of stalking documentation of his interference with my work and relationships, and sworn statements from multiple witnesses. Marcus's final desperate attempt to regain control happened exactly as I was preparing to serve him with the restraining order. He appeared at my apartment building on a Friday evening, demanding to speak with me and claiming that I was ruining his reputation by refusing to communicate with him like a rational adult. This time, I did not hide or call for help. I met him in the building lobby, a public space where our conversation would be witnessed and recorded by security cameras. Speaking in calm, measured tones, I informed him that his behavior constituted criminal harassment, that I had documented every incident, and that legal proceedings were already underway. I explained that his employer had been contacted about his use of company resources for personal harassment, that the fake review campaign against David's business had been reported to relevant professional boards, and that his social media manipulation had been documented as identity fraud. The comprehensive nature of the evidence had transformed his sophisticated harassment campaign into a series of prosecutable crimes. The look of shock on Marcus's face told me everything I needed to know. He had become so focused on manipulation tactics that he had forgotten he was also creating evidence of criminal behavior. His assumption that I would remain passive and reactive had blinded him to the possibility that I might fight back strategically and effectively. The restraining order was granted the following Monday, based on the compelling evidence pattern Lisa and I had assembled. The court order prohibited Marcus from contacting me directly or indirectly approaching my home or workplace and creating any social media content that referenced me or our relationship. But the legal victory was only part of my healing process. The months that followed involved rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by Marcus's manipulation campaign, processing the trauma of extended harassment, and rediscovering the peace I had worked so hard to create. Therapy helped me understand that my response to Marcus's harassment had actually demonstrated tremendous personal growth. The woman who had entered that toxic relationship 3 years earlier would never have been capable of mounting such an organized and effective defense of her own well-being. David and I emerged from the experience with a stronger relationship built on trust and mutual support. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and chosen to stand beside me rather than distance himself from the drama. Our shared experience of facing external threats had created a bond deeper than the casual dating relationship we had enjoyed before. My friendships with Sarah and others in my hiking group were strengthened by their unwavering support during the crisis. They had witnessed Marcus's manipulation tactics firsthand and understood the courage it required to fight back against such a calculated campaign of psychological abuse. Professionally, my colleagues gained respect for how I had handled a difficult personal situation with maturity and legal precision. The documentation skills I had developed during the harassment case actually translated into valuable abilities in my nonprofit work, particularly when dealing with complex environmental impact reports and regulatory compliance issues. The most profound change was internal. I had learned that when someone cannot handle your growth, it reveals everything about them and nothing about you. My happiness was not something I needed to hide or apologize for, nor was it something another person could legitimately claim ownership over. Marcus had intended to prove that I could not survive without him, that my apparent success was simply a facade that would crumble under pressure. Instead, his harassment campaign had demonstrated the opposite. I was stronger, more resourceful, and more supported than either of us had realized. Sometimes the people who cannot let go teach us the most about how far we have come. Marcus's desperate attempts to reclaim control over my life had forced me to defend the progress I had made, and in doing so, I discovered that my healing was more complete than I had dared to believe. The peace I found after the legal resolution was different from the contentment I had felt in that coffee shop months earlier. It was deeper, more tested, more consciously chosen. I had faced my greatest fear and emerged victorious not through luck or outside intervention, but through my own courage and strategic thinking. Now, when I sit in that same coffee shop on Saturday mornings, I carry with me the knowledge that my happiness belongs to me alone. It cannot be taken by someone else's inability to accept my growth, and it does not require anyone else's permission to exist. Have you ever had to deal with an ex who just could not accept that you were better off without them? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they have the strength to fight for their own peace. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your power and protecting your happiness. Thank you for listening, and remember that your growth is not something you ever have to apologize for. Wishing you all the courage to defend the life you have built and the wisdom to recognize your own strength.